This episode is brought to you by Leo Bato and Associates, ang realtor na patok.
So you were in rehab.
So
You got the call.
yeah. I'm chilling out, being clean and doing my meetings, and I have this friend of mine. We'll call him Jordan because that's his name.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Why change the names of the guilty?
Shout out to Jordan. Okay.
Jordan is one of my longest. I met Jordan pretty early on in moving to Los Angeles in 2012. I think I probably met him within the first 6 months of me being here. And he works for a little band called Toto.
Nice little band.
Yeah, and so he's in that camp, and he's been a fan of mine for since day one. He came to see me play with the band. He's like, wow, that drummer's really good. He's got a pretty decent voice too. And, playing my ass off. And we just kept in contact.
Right.
And then for, fast forward 8.5 to 9 years of him calling me up saying, dude, I put your name in the hat for this gig. And never did it come to fruition. Never, ever, ever. So when he called me, I want to say in, it was probably March, I want to say, of this year. And he's like, I put your name in the hat for this gig.
And after 9 years, he was still enthusiastic every time.
He was still, I remember the big joke is like a couple years ago, he does a lot of session work for the Hallmark channel, and so he's always playing, he's writing songs for scoring these really corny Hallmark movies. So he's like, I'm going to get you on one of these gigs playing a session. It pays really great. I'm like, cool, man. Anything that you can throw my way after all these years. He calls me up one day. He's like, hey, man, I got you the session for this Hallmark gig. And I'm like all excited because I really need the work at that point. He's like, so how are your brush chops? Let that be a lesson to the young drummers coming up. Don't neglect the brushes.
No,
because the silence on the other end of the phone is, I'm like, oh. Honestly, so to this day, he's like, hey, man, how are your brush chops? So he calls me up in March, April, whenever it was, and he's like, hey, I put your name in the hat. I've introduced you to CJ Vanston, who's keyboard player, amazing. Played with Joe Cocker for years. He's been on records with everyone from Barbra Streisand to Prince to he's and CJ and I have had drinks together. He's an acquaintance through Jordan. I've known him for probably about 7 years, and he's like, CJ produced a record for Skunk Baxter. I'm like, Skunk Baxter of the Doobie Brothers and Steely Dan and like a gazillion records,
He played guitars for Steely Dan, right?
He played guitar. He was a member of Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers, but he played guitar on probably like 300 records, not even, exaggerating. Like Donna Summer to Dolly Parton, 9 to 5 was him. All this stuff. I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll get that call. And I wasn't like, yeah, whatever, dude. I just said, oh, thanks, Jordan. I appreciate you putting my name in the hat, and I'll wait for the call. So I remember going to dinner that night with my girlfriend and a bunch of friends, and we were all having conversations about, hey, what's going on, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, so I got this call today, and I told them about it. And they're like, wow, that's pretty awesome. I'm like, yeah, never going to. And they're like, well, what if you get the call? I'm like, well, that'll even be more terrifying than not getting the call. I'm going to be ready for that gig. So I kind of forgot about it. And about 2 weeks later, because I had CJ's number on my phone, a big old picture of CJ comes up on my caller ID. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. And I answered the phone. I'm like, hello?
Oh, what'd CJ say?
And he's like, hey, man, how you been? Blah, blah, blah. Small talk, small talk. He's like, hey, yeah, I was talking to Jordan. Got this tour coming up. Got this record that I produced with Skunk Baxter. You know who he is. I'm like, yeah, I've heard of him, yeah. And he's like, I called Jordan because he's kind of, he's the young guy in the LA scene, and he's got a beat on who's the right cats for the gig, and we gave him the 3-part criteria. We said we need a good drummer. Okay, well, in LA you can kind of find a couple guys or girls that are
pretty good.
Play circles,
Just
right?
Go on TikTok,
Yeah, I'm gonna be started in that. And then number 2, they got to be able to sing.
Oh.
Okay, so the list gets a little smaller. And then third thing is they got to be really good with electronic drums. We want programming. We want sampling sounds from the record, all that stuff. And Jordan's response is, I got one name for you, and it's Mark Damian. And of course, in total typical LA response, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. If you are not in their face 24/7 reminding them who you are, the guy's been to my studio. He has a studio blocks from mine. He rehearses at Mates across the street when he's touring with Tears for Fears or wherever he's on. The guy's been on the road with everybody. And oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm available. And he's like, all right, well, we're gonna set up a Zoom meeting with the 3 of us. I'm like, who's the 3 of us? He's like, oh, you and me and the Skunk.
It's Skunk.
Okay. So I was in my private quarters and in my rehab facility, and I'm on this Zoom call with Skunk and Jeff, and I'm like, hey, and they just wanted to get a vibe, and then I remember CJ walked away for a little bit, and Jeff and I were talking, and he's like, so, what do you think about the record, man? Do you dig it? I'm like, I haven't heard the record yet. CJ never sent me the record. I'm like, I don't know. He's like, oh, well, maybe you don't even like the songs. Maybe you don't even like the material. I'm like, Jeff, I think I'll be all right, man. I think whatever you're putting out is probably going to be pretty cool.
But see, honesty pays off. You could have easily said, yeah, I like it.
I mean, honestly, if I would have hated it, I would have been like, crap. Well, I guess I should do the. Oh man! And when I got they sent me a link to a private, song listing, and I listened to it, and I'm like, wow, is this going to be fun? This is just.
Who played drums on the record?
Oh boy, I think there were 2 or 3 different guys, and I cannot tell you one of them, and I feel really bad about that because I just don't remember. It wasn't Vinny,
okay.
It wasn't JR.
Okay.
Although those guys have worked all together,
Yeah.
and the stories are just amazing,
So finally, wait, let's go back to the Zoom call. We're still there. So you haven't listened to the record. CJ was not in that Zoom meeting. It was just you and Skunk.
Well, no, the 3, but he had stepped away to do whatever.
Yes.
So it was
just you and
Jeff
Skunk.
I. Yeah.
So how was he sizing you up?
We were just talking about stuff. We were talking about the record. He asked me if I heard it. I said, no, not yet. The CJ never sent it to me. He was really genuinely concerned about whether or not I liked the material. And I mean, it was brief, but look, there's a lot of people that can play, and we've talked about this before about you've got to share a stage, you got to be at the hotels, you got to be in a bus in travels with these people for an extended period of time.
The dynamic has to work.
So, you can find the players in LA. You can find, the list may shorten a little bit when you put all the criteria in, but are we going to be able to stand this guy for 6 weeks on the road or whatever? So I think they figured out that I was cool enough to be in the room with him, and then weeks went by. CJ and I worked for about 6 weeks in pre-production.
Just both of you.
Yeah, I would
Sampling
go to
stuff.
his studio. I'm like, all right, pull up the stems, man. I gotta, pull
Right.
these things in, and then, I think CJ would talk to Jeff about like the amount of work that we were putting in, and Baxter being kind of old school. He's like, man, why just show up and play the drums? And CJ like, that's not why we called this guy. These were the things that we wanted out of this
Right,
guy.
right.
So the work on the front end, I was just happy to do it.
How many in his band? You, CJ?
There's 4 of us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But you guys have to sound massive, hence the stems, right?
Yeah, there's. I mean, who doesn't use a laptop live anymore? There's
Correct.
a couple things on backing track, but CJ especially prides himself on playing all that stuff. He's got 2 boards, but they're split into to 4 sections, and the stuff that guy's doing, I'm thinking is guitar stuff, and I'm like, where is that coming from? And then I'm seeing him, and he's playing it. There's a section where he's playing banjo and then pedal steel on top, and the custom sounds that he's creating
Right.
with these. Well, I mean, the people on the record too. I mean, Michael McDonald is a guest vocalist and co-songwriter on one of the tunes.
So his stem is coming out.
Well, I mean, Hank, the bass player, is singing the lead
Oh,
vocal
okay.
for that song. So Hank is taking 90% of the lead vocal stuff. But it's like Clint Black is singing a song, Johnny Lang is singing a song, Michael McDonald. Who am I missing? It's like, they really have a lot of different people coming in. I think the original intent was to put out all instrumentals. And I think Michael McDonald was the first one that said, "Hey
some
man,
vocals.
I'll put something down."
Whatever you imagine.
Old flannel voice. That's what Jeff calls it. Old flannel voice came in and laid down this track.